All right. So thank you, Leroy, for leading us in prayer. And I want to start off by saying last week's struggle that I had, my witness is Teresa Guest, because she does the Zoom thing with her work stuff. And so I was like, oh, I think they upgraded me and updated me without asking me, and nothing was where it was supposed to be and all this stuff. And then I just started thinking, you know what? Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm the crazy one or whatever. And Teresa said they updated her and it changed everything for her too. So I was like, thank you, Lord, for giving me this sign that I'm not going insane. It is, or if I am, it's Teresa and I both going insane at the same time. So I'll let you figure out what you believe, but I think I'm okay. And I do want to apologize. I sure did not want to come back and be prepared and ready to roll. And man, I love these Wednesday night Bible studies so much. And then it didn't end up coming together. So I was pretty frustrated, but I apologize. I thank you for coming back. And I think we'll have a couple more here jumping in with us. Even if we do not, we'll have a few more that'll be watching later. And as I said, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So off we go. And please feel free. The thing that makes this a better study every single time is your input. And so if we do have a handful less, that just means that I'll need some input from you as well. So y'all please jump in, share whatever you can, and we will go together through our time. And I believe that the Lord will be blessing us as we cover chapter 4, 5, and 6 tonight. And this is kind of our outline. We're going to begin with a review, turn in the homework, the letter about the temple rebuild, time, Haggai, and a letter about a letter, a resolution, and the temple completed, and then our homework and big takeaways. So let's begin with a quick review. Okay, so Ezra shares the details of the Jewish exiles returning to blank from blank. So are they returning to Jerusalem from Assyria, to Samaria from Babylon, to Jerusalem from Babylon, or toward Jordan from Assyria? You guys know what the correct answer is? C. That is right. It is returning to Jerusalem from Babylon. And this is the first passage of scripture that we see here in Ezra, where Ezra records the decree from King Cyrus that the Lord has spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moving in the heart of the king of Persia to say, anybody who would like to go back to Jerusalem and restore and rebuild that temple, please feel free. Yes. So Ezra details the rebuilding of the temple in blank BC, and Ezra covers about blank years of time. Is it 582, about 20 years, 712 BC, about 40 years, 434 BC, covering about 60 years?
I don't remember.
Is it 516 BC, cover about 80 years? You guys know? Anyone?
D.
D is correct. It is 516 BC. It covers about 80 years of time. Tonight, we're going to see a good chunk of that section of the 80 years of time, and it's going to come into play, and you'll see how it also makes the connection from some of these chapters and different books that we've been talking about that Ezra enlightens.
What is it?
By the way, if you are interested in going back, you can see here that Ezra begins with hope, but ends with disappointment. However, the book points out the need for a new heart, as Jeremiah 31
and I don't know where that came from.
6 share. And this particular thing here comes from the YouVersion Bible app, and I encourage you to use that. That is a good Bible app. Number of different things.
Move version
intros. It's called the YouVersion app. Yep.
I haven't. New.
Yes. All right. So very good. Here we go. This is a timeline of the Old Testament as the kingdom divides around 930. Jonah happens around 800 to 780. Isaiah comes on the scene around 740, 750, the fall of Samaria. And then here is this 70-year exile that we really focus in on. 585 BC, Daniel and all of the other Hebrew children are taken off to Babylon and held captive there. And there is a 70-year exile that is predicted by Jeremiah. However, the decree from Cyrus comes in and they come back and they are returned, and the temple
Could
is
be.
rebuilt about that 70 exile. And then you see Malachi closing out the New Testament around 435, and then about 430 silent years before Jesus comes and before John the Baptist comes on the scene. And this is a little closer view in and zoom in there. Okay. All right. And if you have been reading Ezra, and if you've just been reading kind of Ezra 1 through 6, as we are telling us, hey, we're going to go through these different chapters, you may be wondering, where is Ezra? The truth of the matter is that Ezra doesn't actually show up until Ezra chapter 7. He is in just probably the name of the book comes from Ezra being the one who compiled the stories and the information, brings them all together as the author of the book. Because as we said, it tackles and touches on topics that are over 80 years of time. And so because of that, it's not going to be something that you can say, well, I did this at the beginning when I was this age and that kind of thing, because it's just covering too much time. All right. So true or false, one of the very first things that the
As we
Israelites
said,
did when they got back to Jerusalem from Babylon was to reinstate the daily, monthly, and holiday sacrifices, even though they didn't even have
this
the
isn't true.
temple fully built yet. Is this true
Wasn't the very first
or
thing.
is this false?
He's going to say true.
I am going to say true. That is right.
I told you.
True.
It's not what it says.
The
The first thing they did was go make their own homes.
we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, actually, and we are going to cover that. It's very interesting that you would bring that up,
I hope so.
Leroy, because we're going to cover that tonight, and it is a powerful thing that you will see. And let's just be real clear, real quick. They began the temple, and then there was a hiatus, and then they began the sacrifices, and then they began the temple. And then there was a long hiatus. We'll talk about that tonight. And then they go back in and recommit themselves to completing the work. And there's opposition that they have to face. So we'll talk through that tonight. It's going to be interesting. I think you'll come away with information that you didn't have, and you'll have information that I think will reveal some things. All right. So turn in your homework. Do you have anything from Ezra chapter 4 or 5? Those were the two things that I made reference to for you to read. So if you've read through Ezra 4 or 5 and something jumped out to you, please let me know. Please share with me what jumped out and why. And we'll talk about your favorite part of Ezra 4 or 5. Does anybody have one?
Yeah, that wasn't me earlier. Somebody else was speaking, but I'm good now.
Are you good?
Yeah, yeah.
That was Joseph.
What? Oh, was that somebody else?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
It was Joseph Porter.
my bad. My mistake. All right. Does anybody have, sorry, I thought I had that figured out, but I apologize. Does anybody have any thing that jumped out to them from chapter 4 or chapter 5? Anyone?
Yeah, verses 1 through 4
Yeah.
were interesting.
Of chapter 4 or 5?
Chapter 4.
You want to read them
Chapter
with us
4.
and kind of share with us what you're thinking is interesting, or you can paraphrase it, either one.
Well, yeah, it was basically they asked, well, let us help you build this wall. It was like having the fox in the hen house. You know, it was like it was. I'm thinking, did y'all write that in that book? But yeah, so they the enemies. There's been enemies forever. I mean, and they all of a sudden they're so helpful.
Yeah.
They hated that they were back, but all of a sudden let us help you tear this down. I mean, build it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Go ahead.
And then I said I was kind of confused about that those couple of chapters, because I was like, they're asking to help, for them to help them, but they didn't come with a good mind, because after after they tell them, well, we don't need you to help us, we got this. Then they run off and start, right to the, to kind of like tell on them so that they can stop progress and stuff. So I didn't understand why they wanted to help, but yet still, they didn't want to help.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you guys are getting the story. This is part of what I love about making these assignments and then bringing us back together to read through, and you guys having a chance to share with us what your favorite part is because, when you start reading it with the eye of saying, okay, what's jumping out to me, it starts to help you to understand, okay, now what exactly is going on, and putting it in its context from chapter 1, 2, 3, the background, the story, all of that. And now you see, okay, they're there to rebuild the temple. And there are people there that are pre-existing. We know them now as Samaritans. They would come to become known as Samaritans, who are, as Leroy said, long-standing opponents of the Jews.
Mhm.
And they come on with this idea, and I guess I'm kind of covering some of what we're going to be covering in a minute. But isn't it interesting? Let us help you. We're servants of God too. And then they're like, no, we're going to do this. This is our thing. And this is something that we have been literally commanded to do by Cyrus the king. We're going to handle it ourselves. And then the minute that is what happens, they show their true colors, right? I mean, they didn't say, okay, we just care that the temple gets built. They said, oh yeah, well, then if that's the case, then this is what we'll do to undermine you and stop you from doing what you're saying that you want to do. So their real point was never to be in there shoulder to shoulder. It was to get in and be subversive in the things that they were doing. Does that make sense? And you can see that. And this is a powerful lesson too, right? I mean, this is a powerful lesson that sometimes if you tell somebody, well, let's just pump the brakes, they show their true colors, right? Because the one thing that you can't usually find is somebody who's there to con you for a long time, right? That's usually not going to happen. They're going to be in there. They're going to try to make you make a quick decision, a snap decision, and then they'll show what they really are over a time, but it's too late oftentimes, right? And so in this situation, the Jews showed a lot of wisdom. They said, no, we're going to wait. And then when they did say, we're going to wait, immediately they found out the true character of their opponents and what their real motivation was. And so, there's wisdom in just slowing down sometimes, which is powerful, which is something that we don't often want to do. Great conversation, Leroy, Donna. Thank you. Great stuff. What else do you guys have? Anyone else? What else do you guys have that jumped out to you that you felt like was really powerful? Anyone? Time for me to take some water. Time for you to jump in. I got time for you.
I know that the Greyhound moves slowly. I mean, I know we have the internet. We've got all that. It took forever to get the message back in Babylon back to where they were located. It's like, I think they took a slow dog or a slow cat.
It wasn't a Greyhound. It was more like a Basset Hound. So, the ones instead of the long, shapely legs, little bitty squatty legs, more my style. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, anyway, that is interesting. And we are going to talk a little bit about that and talk about the time that we lose when we shift into neutral in our own minds. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Some good stuff there for sure. All right. Last chance. Anybody got some homework to turn in? Anybody want to be the teacher's pet? Anybody want a gold star? Anybody want a smiley face by their name on the chalkboard? Anyone want any of these that you didn't get in your childhood? I'll stick a star on there for Leroy. There's one for Donna. The rest of you want a star, or we want to keep moving? All right. Some of you guys were held too much as children, and I got nothing over you. All right, here we go. Let's understand what is happening here. Babylon is conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, whose capital is Susa in modern Iran. King Cyrus the Great decrees, and I want you to notice, I put a couple of little asterisks here. We're going to talk about this, that all the Jews still left in Babylon in modern Iraq can go back to their homeland in Jerusalem, modern Israel. So you guys have seen this on the map, and we're going to talk about it. We'll show it to you on the map. But only about 40 to 50,000 people return. Now, let me remind you that I've leaned heavily on this guy right here. His name is Pastor Bungee Garrett. I guess I'm bungee jumping. But anyway, I go in there, I listen to his, got a couple smiles. He's doing a great job going verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And one of the things that he says in Ezra chapter 2 is, he quotes from Josephus that said, many remained in Babylon being unwilling to leave their possessions. In other words, there were people who were valuing their own lives that they had built over the life that they had waiting for them in Jerusalem. And so this secular historian notes that only about 50,000 people, including all of those who were part of the household, they all went, and there was only about 50,000, probably at least triple that amount stayed in Babylon. And let me just mention something to you. You guys remember that I told you these are all the different books that are influenced or touched by or illuminated by the book of Ezra. Tonight, we're going to go heavily into Haggai. Also want to mention Zechariah, who was a prophet alongside Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah in that time frame. And I want to point out that Esther, the book of Esther, takes place between what we end tonight talking about and when Ezra starts coming towards Jerusalem in Ezra chapter 7. But let's take a quick little detour here. You guys remember that Queen Vashti was deposed as the queen. She was put away. And the king made an edict saying that she would never be allowed to be queen or never be allowed back in his presence. But then the king started getting all the puppy dog eyes, right? You remember that? He was upset. He was sad. He wanted Queen Vashti, but he had written a law. And the problem was that he was a Medo-Persian king. And in the law of the Medes and the Persians, if you wrote it, it did not get repealed and it did not get changed. You guys remember that about that? And so that's part of why Ezra comes to prominence, because he can't just change his mind and bring her back. This was their way of showing their greatness. We're so great that whatever we say stands for eternity, that kind of machismo, right? Which I'm into it. Don't get me wrong. I'm a guy, I'm just as delusional as the rest of us. So I'm cool with it, right? So anyway, that's how it's all going down. But think about what this is going to do in our conversation tonight. King Cyrus makes a decree and says, let everybody go back and build. And let everybody who goes back and builds, let them have this, and let them have this, and let them have this, and all of these supplies, and let it be built. Let God's kingdom temple be rebuilt by his people, right? And so again, in the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed, this is what is decreed. And then a number of years later, there is a letter that's sent back and forth, and they're like, hey, these guys are rebuilding the temple. What's up with that? Well, the decree is still on the books. It's just been there so long and been out of sight, out of mind for so long that this thing that God used to be a blessing in the book of Esther, he's about to reuse that same thing to be a blessing in the book of Ezra again. And let me just say something real quick. I hate government red tape. I know you do too. Like, we hate that stuff. There's nothing more frustrating than dealing with the government, right? I mean, I heard it said that the Gettysburg Address was like 350 words, and the IRS tax code is like 350 pages, something like that. And it's just like the difference between inspiration and absolute, degradation, right? So ultimately we hate these things, but God is not above or unable using something that is very frustrating to us and seems like it's against us, but yet he sometimes uses it for his own purposes, even in something so incredibly frustrating. We're going to see how that happens tonight in the book of Ezra. All right, let's keep moving here. Let's understand again what's happening. The Israelites get back to Jerusalem, immediately set up an altar, reinstate the sacrifices to God according to the law of Moses. They begin this practice despite the fact that they had not yet built the new temple, the second temple in Jerusalem. And then thirdly, also from lesson 2, the Israelites lay a foundation for the new temple, despite opposition from people around them, the Samaritans, who were people of Assyrian descent living in Israel's homeland and or married to Assyrians. When the foundation is marked out, it reveals that the temple will not be as grand as the original temple of Solomon. You guys remember that at the end of chapter 3? And so those who had seen the first temple were wailing and crying, and those who saw the second temple were excited about it. And so you couldn't really tell if it was a joyous occasion or a sad occasion because of all the intermingling of that, if you remember in the chapter 3. So that kind of tells us where we are. All right, so let's talk about the letter about the temple rebuild. And let me just say, I've shared, I talked with Teresa. She's got a little something going on with her throat, and we got so much ground to cover. And so many crazy names anyway. So all's good. Teresa will be back with us, and you guys will get a break from my voice next week. But I'm going to do most of the reading this evening. So let's begin in Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel, to the heads of the families, and said, "Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God, and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us." And so we see this jumping out. We've already talked a little bit about it, so I'm going to keep moving. Now, before you form an opinion, ask yourselves, is this an informed opinion? And I wrote this down. As individuals, especially in 2023, we tend to get a little bit of info, and we don't know any of the backstory, but we believe only the first side of the story that we've heard. How many of you guys know that old saying that there's two sides to every story, right? I have heard it said there is your side, my side, and the truth lies somewhere in between, right? And Eric's holding up the number 3. In other words, Eric, you're saying there are
3 sides to every story. That's right.
Yeah, that's what
Your side, my side, and the truth.
Your side, my side, and the truth. And I notice that oftentimes when we think we've heard something, we get all riled up about it, but we don't dig any deeper than the initial information. And then fourthly, we allow our first info that we receive to color all of the following info. We don't weigh them both equally. So I just would say to us as Christians, it would be wise for us to be wise. That ultimately there is a second side. If you just simply read that first part of Ezra chapter 4, that is not the whole story. But it feels like, oh, they're the bad guys. We asked to help and they wouldn't let us. Well, there's a lot more at work here and a lot more going on. And then, as I said earlier, they reveal themselves pretty quickly. Then the people around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And at the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Bishlam, I love these long lists of names. This is great. Just watch. I'm going to kill it or be killed by it. I'm not sure. Bishlam, Mithradeth, Tabeel, and the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. And the letter was written in the Aramaic script and in the Aramaic language. And notice this little footnote we'll get to in just a minute. And Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, as follows. And then verse 9 through 10 gives the particulars of who the letter is from, who it's to. And this is a copy of the letter they sent to him. And by the way, Ezra chapter 4, verse 7 says the text of 4:8 through 6:18 is written in Aramaic. So just an FYI, the New Testament is written almost entirely in Greek with a little sprinkling of Aramaic. The Old Testament is almost entirely in Hebrew with a little sprinkling in Ezra and in Daniel of Aramaic. If you're asking me what Jesus probably spoke to his disciples and spoke to the people as they went through their lives, they probably spoke Aramaic, understood Hebrew, and understood Greek. As crazy as that sounds, that's not unusual, even in today's modern society, for a number of people speak a number of different languages, especially outside the United States. And so that's probably what's going on. But notice there's three groups in this conversation. There's the Jewish exiles who are trying to rebuild the temple. There's the opponents that are Samaritans that are trying to keep them from building the temple. And then there's the government officials who are caught in the middle. And so they're getting one side saying, we're just building the temple, nothing to see here. They're getting another side saying, these people are trying to set this thing up so you won't ever get another dime from them. And they're going to, throw off your yoke and be a pain in your side and a thorn in your flesh as soon as they can. And the government officials are just trying to get to the bottom of the thing because they don't really understand. And so a letter goes back and forth from the government officials in that area to the king in Susa. So it goes all the way from Jerusalem to modern day Iran. Okay. So here's what the letter said. The king should know that the people who came up to us have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They're restoring the walls and repairing foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and eventually the royal revenues will suffer. And since we're under obligation to the palace and it is not proper for us to sing the king dishonored, we're sending this message to inform the king so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. In these records, you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place with a long history of sedition. That's why this city was destroyed. So we inform the king that if this city is built and its walls are restored, you will be left with nothing in the Trans-Euphrates area. And then the king sent this reply to Rehum, the commanding officer, Shimshai, the secretary, and the rest of his associates living in Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. Greetings. The letter you sent has been read and translated in my presence. And I issued an order, a search was made, and it was found that this city has a long history of revolt against kings, has been a place of rebellion and sedition. And Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates, and taxes, tribute, and duties were paid to them. Now issue an order to these men to stop work so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests? And as soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai, the secretary, and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. Thus, the work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that jumps out? Any questions Any thoughts that you have, a word, a sentence, something jumping out to you that you see? Anyone? All those names,
You
I
know,
drink.
they it's so people of God, all of a sudden they're in the territory of these of Artaxerxes, but there's God's people and they expected them to pay homage and everything to these foreign dignitaries, and I just kind of like, I haven't studied enough to figure out why they fell into that jurisdiction, besides God giving them the leeway to take, to come in and take charge of them. But well, what a bunch of well, I can't say backstabbing because they're just distant cousins, but it's just amazing to me how they really hated these Jewish people, man. It just blows me away.
Yeah. Well, it is pretty rough the way that they'll use anything and everything to get themselves, a leg up, so to speak, on the Jews for sure. And you can see it wasn't just the Jews towards the Samaritans, it was the Samaritans toward the Jews as well. And neither one of them were distinguishing themselves really in the way that they were treating one another for sure. Bad business all the way around for sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of people to pay homage, honor, and tribute to in this situation for sure. It's a long list. It's local government, it's state government, it's national government, and on down the line. Not that we can identify in today's world, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. So here's what jumps out to me. The work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, I will just share this with you very quickly. Like a Roman Caesar or an Egyptian Pharaoh or a US president, the name Xerxes and Darius means Lord. They're titles as much as they are proper names. And so whenever you see that, well, Pharaoh this and Pharaoh that, and it could be Pharaoh, all the different Pharaohs, but they're all known as Pharaoh. It's going on like that. And so when we see this thing, well, it went to this person and then this person and then this person, we don't get a real sense. And I won't go into it just simply because of time, but here is what you need to know. Basically, when it says the work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year, that's a 17-year period. 17 years. So real quickly, the Samaritans cannot keep Israelites from building a new temple. So they send a letter about them, emphasizing all the bad, all the negative, all the past and possibilities of the Israelites continuing to build. When King Darius of Persia receives the letter, he puts a halt to the building immediately. And here is what we know, jumping into the time and Haggai's ministry and the letter about a letter. Let's talk about this. That means that there were 17 years when the edict comes down and says, stop it immediately. And when they actually begin to rebuild, it's 17 years. So let that settle in on you for just a second. They probably allowed themselves a short amount of time thinking, well, this is what we have to do for now. But then the momentum ceased and it was really hard to get back to where they were before. If I were guessing, I have a feeling they thought, you know what, we might have to take off a year or so, and then we'll get back to this after all this gets cleared up. But they lost 17 years. Are you guys hearing what I'm saying? Are y'all following what's going on here? I mean, can y'all identify with this? Like, let's talk a minute about how this applies to us in our world. And I mean, my goodness, we had a pandemic that put everything in our lives on pause for about a 2-year period, maybe more, 2.5 years, maybe 3. Like, we can identify with losing the momentum and needing to stop, but then finding it hard to get going again. You guys see what I'm saying here? I'm sharing this with you, not in a way of like accusatory or anything like that, but we need to realize that this stuff happens, and it still happens today, where we had momentum, we were moving, we were going in a good direction, we were doing what we knew the Lord was asking us to do. And then for maybe even a right reason, we slowed down, and then we came to a standstill, and then we stopped, and we never picked it back up again. It's dangerous business. And we need to remember that just simply knowing that we should later get back to this does not make it easy to actually get back to the movement that we need to make, if that makes sense. I don't know. Am I the only one who's seeing this powerfully speaking, to our world? Or you guys have thoughts, comments, questions, anything? Anyone?
Definitely similar. I mean, say the hands of justice move slowly,
Yeah.
but they do turn.
Yeah.
That's describing the United States. What they're doing over there, a lot of similarities.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things in our world that probably should have already been taken care of, or at least addressed, or further down the line. They are not. Why? Because what is Newton's, is it Newton's law of thermodynamics? I'm messing that up. But basically, bodies in motion tend to stay in motion, and bodies at rest tend to stay at rest, right? And that's why it's hard to get back in good habits and easy to stay in bad ones, right? This is what it is. But as God often does, he provides a catalyst, and the catalyst's name is Haggai. Now, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet, a descendant of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and in Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, who was over them. And Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, son of Jozadak, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them. And this is what Haggai chapter 1, verse 2 through 8 says. So we just saw in Ezra chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, telling us that Haggai and Zechariah kind of rose up in this time when there needed to be change. And this is what Haggai said. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people, these exiles, these people say that time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains, bring down timber, and build my house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. That's powerful words from Haggai. And he's saying, you keep saying it's not yet time to rebuild. I'm asking you, it's been 17 years. When's the time going to come if it's not come now? And by the way, you had time to rebuild your house, but didn't have time to give time for my house, says God. to you. And so think about what you found. You thought if you did all these things, you'd be satisfied. You'd have all you needed. You'd have everything you wanted, but you haven't. So give careful thought to your ways. Powerful. If you go back and read Haggai chapter 1, and then you connect it to Ezra. And so this is what we see. At that time, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethaniah, Bozani, and their associates, all the cool dudes, went to them and said, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it? So what's happened is they've heard the word of Haggai, and they're like, you know what? He's right. We're going to start rebuilding. Nothing's changed legally. The only thing that's changed is what? Their heart and their head. And they said, you know what? He's right. We're going to rebuild. We were commanded to do this by Cyrus. We were given permission to do this by Cyrus. We all understand the law of the Medes and the Persians. And these people that are trying to intimidate us, they're not going to intimidate us anymore. So listen. So they start rebuilding. They went to them and said, hey, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and finish it? They also asked, what are the names of all those who are constructing this building? But the eye of their God was watching over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius and his reply would be received. You see the two mindsets? This mindset says they told us to stop, so we will, and we'll wait and we'll start back when they send us a letter. This mindset says they've threatened us, but we know we're in the right. And so we're going to rebuild, and we won't stop until they send a letter that says we will stop, and we have to stop. Right? And so here's what goes on. This is a copy of the letter that Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethaniah, Bozani, and their associates sent to King Darius. The report they sent read as follows: to King Darius, cordial greetings. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah, to the temple of the great God. People are building it with large stones, placing timbers in the walls. The work is being carried out with diligence, is making rapid progress under their direction. We questioned the elders and asked them who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it. We also asked their names so that we could write down their names for the leaders for your information. And this is the answer they gave us. We're the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we're rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, one that a great king of Israel had built and finished. But our ancestors angered the God of heaven. And I want you to notice this, because we're short on time. I want you to notice this. They don't place the blame on anybody but themselves. When they say, why do we need to rebuild this temple of a great God? Why didn't he keep it? Here's why. Because our ancestors angered God, and he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean king of Babylon, who destroyed this temple and deported our people to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree, remember that decree that cannot be changed, to rebuild this house. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem to the temple of Babylon. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, appointed governor, told him, take these articles and go to the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild that house of God. So this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. And from that day to the present, it's been under construction. It's just not yet finished. So now this is a big one. Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made of the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem, and then let the king sing us his decision in this matter. And just notice here what they said, and notice they're doing this in Jerusalem. There's archives in Babylon. They're singing letters here. This could take a year easily, and that's another year lost. But they say, no, we're going to build while you figure it out, rather than figure it out and wait on the government forever, right? And this is important because for us, sometimes we fear man more than we fear God. And when God says through his prophet, get back in there and get building on my house, do that. Show me that you love me. Show me that you honor me. And then they begin to do it. He begins to bless, and they begin to make progress, leaps and bounds progress. It's incredible. All right. Questions, thoughts, or comments? We've gone through a lot here. Anything jumping out to you? Anything that you see that you want to share? Anyone?
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, just verse 11 through 13 kind of captivated me, and that chapter 5.
Yeah.
There was a warning about if anyone interfered, what they would do to them.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
These people,
They were serious.
I mean, yeah, they were real serious.
Yes.
But even, and just keep it real quick. I mean, it's just like when God freed Moses, led God's people out of Egypt, and when they were walking away, they gave them all that gold, all the silver to go with them. God has a powerful way of brings new meaning to a startup.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty good stuff. Yeah, God's
Venture
powerful.
capital plan. God's venture capital plan right there.
Venture capital, yes.
That's right. And it is powerful. And we're going to read that passage in chapter 6. And it is powerful. And I just love how their obedience moves the heart of not only the King of Kings, but also the earthly kings, because of what God's pulling the strings. And I did not mean to rhyme, but that was pretty cool. But yes, that is true. When we do what God says to do, he honors us, and he begins to move on our behalf in this world, not just simply, giving us good feelings, although the peace of God should never be discounted. He's moving in the physical realm, and this is a perfect example of how our obedience as God's followers moves his hand to work on our behalf and to accomplish his purposes. It's powerful stuff. All right, questions, and any other questions, thoughts, or comments real quick? Anyone? I know we're covering a lot of ground, but I do want to answer anything if you're struggling or having a hard time.
Well, thank you for letting us know that how long it took, like the 17 years, because I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
I know it's been a long time. I know it was like 17 years that it took him to actually.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that sometimes God's word, it shares things that make sense to the people that it was written for and written by. But in the ancient history that we're dealing with, this is 2,500 years ago, at least, we're talking about a lot of changes since then. And so there's a powerful lesson there, but it's hidden and buried. And that's why we want to make sure it's being shared and brought to light. All right. So let's talk about the resolution in the temple getting completed. The whole point of the restoration of God's people. Let's begin in chapter 6. So King Darius then issued an order. They searched in the archives, stored in the treasury at Babylon. So again, we're dealing Jerusalem to Susa, Susa to Babylon, Babylon back to Susa, Susa back to Jerusalem. As crazy as that sounds, that's what's going on. And a scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana. That one ate me up a little bit. In the province of Media, and this was written on it. Memorandum: in the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree that could not be altered. That's why all those little dots are there. Concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem, let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. It is to be 60 cubits or 90 feet high and 60 cubits or 90 foot wide, with 3 courses of large stone and 1 of timbers, and the costs are to be paid by the royal treasury. So this is awesome. This thing that could have gotten forgotten is now getting restarted and is getting paid for out of the royal treasury, not out of anything else. Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem, brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their places in the temple of Jerusalem. They're to be deposited in the house of God. Now then, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, Shethar-Bozenai, and you and the other officials of that province, stay away from there. Boys, get back. Go back to your offices and leave them boys alone. Let them do what they're doing. Don't interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. And moreover, I hereby decree what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of this house of God. Their expenses are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates so that the work will not stop. So not only are all of the things getting paid for, but now they're paying these men that are overseeing the work. All of their expenses are now being paid. So this has been a frustrating waiting time, but now when they stood up for themselves and said, no, we're going to keep working because we know we're doing what's right, God comes to their aid again and blesses them over and abundantly. And then the king says, whatever's needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, olive oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, that has to be given to them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pray for the well-being of the kings and his sons. And furthermore, I decree that if anyone defies this edict, a beam is to be pulled from their house and they're to be impaled on it. This is what Leroy was saying, man. These guys are not there to play around. And for this crime, their house is to be made a pile of rubble. And may God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lift a hand to change this decree or to destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it. Let it be carried out with diligence. Some powerful stuff, man. The king is flexing. He's flexing his muscles. He's given them everything that they need and everything that they could ever ask for. And it's all being done because God's people stood up for what was right and didn't run away from the fight, didn't let opponents run them off of something that they knew they should be doing. They responded to God's leading through Haggai, and it's a powerful thing. All right. Anything jumping out to you guys in this at all? Anything? All right, let's cover this last little bit of ground. Then, because of the decree of King Darius that he had sent, Tattenai and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates carried it out with diligence. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah, a descendant of Edo. And they finished building the temple according to the command of God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. Then the people of Israel, priests, Levites, rest of the exiles, celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, one for each one of the tribes of Israel. And they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. And on the 14th day of the 1st month, the exiles celebrated the Passover. That's the highest holy day for all of the Israelites. They purified themselves. All were ceremonially clean, and all of their Gentile neighbors, just so they could seek the Lord, the God of Israel. For 7 days, they celebrated with joy that feast because the Lord had filled them with joy, changing the attitude of the king of Assyria so that he assisted them in the work on the house of God, the God of Israel. So I want to just share with you as we kind of bring this to a close. Here's your homework, and here's the big takeaways that we're going to talk about. First of all, let's talk about today's restoration lesson. Listen to God first and foremost, not man. You will always tell yourself that the time for restoration is not yet right, but God says it's time, and with him all things are possible. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man is a snare, or could be interpreted bondage. The truth is that we always are afraid of mankind and forget to be afraid of the God who works for us and could set his face against us if we set our face against him. So the problem for us is that we are short-sighted. We forget the power of the Almighty God and fear people that we really don't even like or respect. It's a problem. It's the way that we are as humans. It's not me saying this to you about you. This is me saying this to us as humankind. I do it, you do it, we all do it. We fear what others think about us and forget to be more concerned to please the God who created us, has called us, and enables us. Thinking about these guys on the temple, they stopped for 17 years. And God said, my house is an embarrassment. You guys have put yourselves first and me far at the end. You've listened to a king and forgotten that I'm the King of Kings, right? And so all of this stuff is happening, and all of this is being done over years and years and years. Finally, a preacher stands and says, it's time. Let's restore the house of God. And when that happens, everybody rallies to that cause and says, yes, it is time. So for us, we have to overcome our fears by feeding our faith and living in faithfulness. It's keep focusing on the faith and keep living in that faithfulness. This gives us momentum to start again and to finish what God has called us to do. That's the restoration lesson that we see. Next week's homework is to pre-read Ezra 7. We'll cover more than that, but just pre-read Ezra 7. And now's my chance my reminder for you. Do you have a big takeaway that you would like to share? Something that you take away from this lesson, and then I'll share one final big takeaway before we end. Anyone? Anyone?
I just believe that God reminded his people that he was alone, he was sovereign.
Yeah.
And no matter what the earthly king said,
Yeah.
he sits on top of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's good. That's good, Leroy. That he's a king. I'm the King of Kings. Right? He's the guy who's saying to do this, but I'm telling you to do something different. Choose to listen to me, kind of thing. Good stuff. Anyone else? Another big takeaway that you have personally? Anyone?
I say chapter 5, verse 11, that we're the servants of God today. And, it's up to us to share Jesus Christ.
Yeah. No, that's good, Frank. That's good. We often read this story and forget that we are this story, right? That we're in this story as these people. The children of God then are the children of God now, right? We make some of the same mistakes and fall into some of the same traps, but the blessing is that some of the same blessings for obedience are ours to be had if we will follow the right path like they often do. So great stuff, Frank. Good job. Good job.
It's like he makes ways where there seems to be no way. When we think that it's not a way, he always like make that way for you. And like the men that was rebuilding, not only that they're, they started out with not getting paid, but in the end, eventually, they were getting paid for the job that they were doing. Yeah. And an abundance, because pretty much God has set everything in motion that this is how it's gonna go. And these men are gonna rebuild, and nothing will stop them or get in their way. And they're gonna get paid for it, whatever they're doing it. They're rewarded, actually.
This just came to me just now. Their obedience preceded their abundance.
Yes.
And for most of us, that is always going to be true. My obedience is going to precede my abundance, whether that's, well, I mean, financially is what's mentioned here, but there is much more than that. If I obey him in the way that I treat people, then I will begin to be treated in a better way, right? The abundance follows that obedience. So that's, I wish I would have thought of that before. That could have been something I could have said earlier and probably had on a slide somewhere. All right. Good stuff, you guys. Thank you, Leroy, Frank, Donna. Thank you. Let me share this with you and we'll call it a night. We must fear God and his direction more than those of man and government. Their directions take second place to God. The exiles allowed themselves to stop, likely assuming that they would come back to their project soon, and they lost 17 years of time, momentum, and positive things. But when they changed their mindset to an obedience mindset, no matter what, they finished something that stood and was a source of pride for their country and for their God for hundreds of years in just 4 years worth of effort. Oftentimes we overestimate our momentum and we underestimate, the positive that is to come. And in the midst of that also, we often overestimate what it would take to get restarted. And it's an interesting thing. They waited for 17 years. They could have done the project 4 times, easily, 4 times over, if they would have just stayed on that path in the very beginning. How much of our life is wasted and how much time is lost, all because we don't obey God first and man second. So, all right. Well, God bless you guys. Thank you all so much for your time. We've just got 2 more weeks left, believe it or not, in Ezra. And I appreciate you guys jumping on here. We'll go a little deeper next week. Read chapter 7 for us if you can. Come ready to share and ready to learn. And thank you guys again for your time. Appreciate y'all. I hope y'all have a good rest of the week. And God bless you, man. Let's continue to keep going deep in God's word together. Okay. All right. Y'all have a good night.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, y'all.
Later, Pastor.
Appreciate you, bro.